Welcome to the Webinar Talk Show. I'm Liz Green.
And I'm Tom Singer. We created the Webinar Talk Show because Eliz and I believe that webinars should be better than a talking head over PowerPoint, and they don't have to be long and boring.
Not long and boring. About 25 minutes. You can get a lot of information in an engaging way, and it's information that people are going to take away and use because they were engaged with the way it was delivered.
And the interview process is one of the best ways, and something that's often overlooked because we're so used to that person standing on stage and speaking for an hour. As we've moved to this sort of online, virtual, and hybrid world, we forget that we're accustomed to interviews because we've been watching Larry King and Oprah and others interview people for decades.
Exactly. And you know, Tom, we have been working quite a bit with organizations who are trying to shift their what was going to be in-person content to the virtual world. And it's interesting, we have discovered that what might have been set in person for an hour or 3 hours or whatever it is, really for virtual is condensed to a very short delivery. And then if you want to use that time, so if you had something that was scheduled for an hour, delivering the content should maybe be 20 minutes tops. And then the rest of it should be working with that content. Otherwise, people are like,
Yeah, because the reality is that if you were to watch Live with Kelly and Ryan, they don't introduce someone like Ryan Gosling and then bring him out and he just talks to a PowerPoint for an hour. They interview him. They ask him about the new movie. They ask him, questions and get him to share. And that's what we do here on the Webinar Talk Show. And I'm excited about today, Eliz.
I am too. I met Elisa Hayes at our National Speakers Association conference. And in fact, I believe her husband kind of saved my bacon one day because he found my phone and got it back to me, which is fantastic.
Well, he's your hero then, yeah.
He was definitely my hero for the day. But here's the thing. Elisa has a background as an entertainer, as an actress, and she experienced a really horrible accident and then came out the other side really being able to tell stories that made people pay attention to the people with disabilities in our community. She went so far as to get training so that she can help people be compliant with ADA issues, but also understand how being inviting and engaging and welcoming of people with disabilities, as opposed to making them sit in the back, can impact your bottom line.
It's not just about complying with the law. It's so much more than that. Absolutely.
So we are so delighted to welcome Elisa Hayes to the show. She calls herself a half-assed speaker. We're going to find out why she does that. Welcome to the Webinar Talk Show, Elisa Hayes.
Ta-da!
Ta-da!
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, we're glad to have you.
We are. Why are you a half-assed speaker?
Right. We have to address that one right from the top.
Right.
Exactly. So this accident that I was in, and the very condensed, because we have a short amount of time, is that I was traveling on a highway, pulling a truck and trailer with two employees of mine. We ended up jackknifed in a snowstorm on this highway. Me being the boss, their lives of highest priority. So got them evacuated safely. They're alive and well and doing great today. In the process, however, I was body slammed by a semi as I was on the run trying to get to safety. The truck driver was going 65 miles an hour on cruise control, didn't touch the brakes, launched my body 90 feet through the air, and I was impaled on a guardrail. So super bad, right?
Super bad.
Super bad, exactly. And my pelvis got folded in half in what's the fancy term, highly comminuted open book fracture. The bottom line is that I spent 3.5 months hospitalized the first time. And during that time, I developed sepsis on top of everything else that was trying to kill me. And they had to amputate all of the gluteal muscles on the left side. So I am literally a half-assed speaker.
You're really half-assed.
Yes, I really half-assed. Which means I use a wheelchair. I use a cane. I can walk because I don't have a spinal cord injury, but I just don't walk very far.
Mm-hmm. Tell us why, as we're looking at both virtual hybrid experiences, but also in-person events, why is it important for event professionals to pay attention to the people with disabilities in their audience, those members, especially who maybe have invisible disabilities?
Right. Oh my gosh, it's so important because part of what people don't realize is that people with disabilities represent 1 in 5 people in the United States in particular.
Wow,
And
I don't think I realized it was that high.
right. It's constantly underestimated. And in fact, depending on which study you look at, it's even creeping as close to 1 in 4. And that's because there are so many people with invisible disabilities. And the other part is that when people think of disabilities, they still have this implicit bias that people with disabilities are those poor people and we have to take care of them. And, and so they don't think of people with disabilities in the business world. They don't think of people with disabilities in meetings and events and things like that, because what people really don't realize is they so often have this unconscious bias in their head that the people with disabilities are just at home. Well, they're at home because they can't get into your event. And that's why.
Right. And they're not literally poor people. You were in some of the information that you sent us, there's an economic interest here in making sure they can get into your event.
Oh, huge. This was the big turning point for me as an entrepreneur my whole life. This is the one that really set my head on fire. Is I read a research study published in 2018. The link is in the resources on my website, where they discovered that the disposable income of working age people with disabilities is $21 billion, which is more than the Black communities and Latinx communities combined. Which is shocking, because when was the last time you saw marketing directed toward people with disabilities?
Yeah, you rarely see that.
No, and you don't see people with disabilities represented in marketing. You don't see it. It's sort of that if you dig through the information, you can find our disability policy of how we're compliant. And it's all about, we have to follow the law. We've got to be compliant with the ADA, which is just,
So you bring up a really interesting point that, a lot of times these people, you don't see them at your events because you're not really that compliant. They can't come because it's not there for them. As we go to this hybrid and virtual world, all of a sudden, that's a whole market of people who can be attending our association and corporate events. And yet, I don't know that those of us who work in the meetings industry are thinking about people with disabilities as we shift towards online meetings. Right,
exactly. So when we think of disabilities, we think of people who use wheelchairs. We all see the symbol in the wheelchair. And incidentally, side note, public service announcement, the wheelchair symbol that is, the stick figure dude who's sitting kind of like a piece of furniture, right? That's just awful. Get rid of that, please. As meeting planners, just get rid of it. I'm not a piece of furniture. That's annoying. Use the current symbol that is accepted and promoted within the disability community, that is an active figure that's pushing the wheels forward and leaning forward, because what that indicates is somebody with independence. Independence is dignity, somebody who can move themselves. So from the very beginning, before you even have the event, how you communicate about it, the information that you put out there, those subtle cues matter a lot.
Is that something that both meeting planners and really anyone who's watching this, is that symbol, is that something they can easily find and download and access to be able to use?
Absolutely. You can even on your emojis on your phone, you can even find it. Exactly. So it's really easy. Just do a quick Google search for new wheelchair accessibility symbol and find the little blue square of the person moving forward. And you can see the symbol on my website. I don't think I have a downloadable icon there. I guess I maybe should do that.
Well, there, just make a little note. That's the thing to add. There's always more, right?
Right.
Tom and I have done the emceeing of the virtual part of hybrid events. And I remember a gentleman who used a wheelchair coming to us and did our favorite thing is that sort of hallway interview piece where you get people just come in and want to talk to you about something. That's really fun. So he came in and he was talking about how much more accessible the event was for him because he had both the in-person and the virtual together, because he was saying he was not able to sit through everything during the day. So he was able to pick and choose the things he wanted to be present in the room for, and then choose the things that he would like to be more comfortable in his hotel room watching it on the live stream. And that was something I don't think any of us considered at the time, but it's something I talk with meeting professionals about. It's like, why wouldn't you want to make it more accessible?
Right. You know, first of all, as we obviously said, you make it more accessible because you're leaving money on the table if you don't. And like for me, I will sit for long periods of time. And back when I used to travel, remember when we used to do that?
Oh yeah, there were those like airplanes and hotel rooms, and yeah, I remember that.
Right. But I would have to sit for long periods of time. It was really painful. I do much better if I can take breaks and I can stretch out and stretch my legs because I just have so much hardware holding me together. It hurts. And a lot of people with disabilities are that way. People who are neurodiverse, formerly referred to as autism spectrum. So people who are neurodiverse can become just simply overstimulated with just too much coming at them. And it's disorienting and it creates an inability to focus. It creates an agitation, an internal agitation. So for them to be able to get away, to control the volume, to do what people who are deaf or hearing impaired, which would be to read closed captioning, if we have that going on, and we could talk about that, gives them a chance to control the stimulus coming at them. And that's one of those invisible disabilities that people don't realize may be actually a much larger portion of their attendees than they would even think about.
Let's talk about that closed captioning piece.
Yeah.
Because I recognized my daughter has started to edit these videos for us, and I realized that I didn't do the training to put the closed captioning on. And that's just one of the things I think is important, but there's some, trouble out there if you're putting videos out and you're not making them accessible. That's one of the things that's covered, right?
Right. So a few things about that. First of all, don't even remotely feel bad because I'm a certified ADA coordinator, and I'm embarrassed to say my own website is not fully accessible. All of my videos are not perfectly captioned. I'm working on, working on it, obviously. And so don't feel bad because.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that.
It's a work in progress for absolutely everybody. With a number of the closed captioning services that are offered through, that you can connect to Zoom or through YouTube's automatic algorithms that they have, it uses AI, which has about an 80% accuracy rate. Technically, that's not in compliance with the law even, because it's not considered accurate enough to be effective communication. And that's the legal standard, effective communication. The interesting thing, kind of the obvious thing that people don't even think about is the ADA was passed 30 years ago, 30 years as of the 26th of July.
Yay!
So it predates the internet. There's
yeah,
right,
okay.
Right. So there's nothing in the ADA itself about the internet because it didn't exist. And Since then, a number of legislative pieces have come out, and the Supreme Court had a ruling on the Domino's case. I don't know if you're familiar with the Domino's case, but it was a gentleman who tried to order a pizza online. He's blind and he couldn't order a pizza. So this got fought in court about an accessibility issue. Domino's argued that an internet presence is not a physical place for accommodation. And the lower courts said, yes, it is. You're wrong. People with disabilities have to be able to order a pizza just like everybody else. Domino's fought it all the way to the Supreme Court, which does not make me a huge fan of Domino's. I'm going to be honest about that. Sorry, Domino's. I know. Apparently they're not going to hire me now. I've just done a terrible.
They're not a sponsor of the webinar talk show.
I know, but it's a court case. This is public law. So they fought it to Supreme Court. The Supreme Court then refused to hear the case. They remanded it back to the lower courts, which then effectively created case law that says you have to have your websites, your videos, all of your electronic digital communication has to be accessible, because those are places of business nowadays. And that is the largest growing group of lawsuits anywhere in the country.
Interesting.
Right. Because the ADA is civil rights legislation, that means that in order to prove anything, there's no ADA police coming around, right? So the only way to prove anything is through lawsuits. This isn't people being mean. There's a whole trope about people with disabilities who are just lawsuit crazy. It's not that. It's just that it's the only way to prove it.
Okay. So you don't want to be the test case.
No, you don't want to be Domino's in this.
Right.
So how quickly do you think technology will catch up? Because if we're not able to flick a switch and make everything accessible to everybody, then it takes time and money, and it becomes an issue. People may want to have their event have closed caption for everything that's going on, but there's, how do they do that if it's cost prohibitive? They want to be inclusive. Is this something you think in the next couple of years, technology will catch up and make this doable?
I really do. Actually, the good news is that companies like Google and Microsoft, Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, I was attending earlier this month, I was attending a whole webinar with Microsoft about accessibility issues, for example. And Satya Nadella has a huge heart for this. Personally, accessibility is a big issue at Microsoft. They're working like crazy. Google and all of the powerhouses in the Silicon Valley are working like crazy on accessibility issues, because people are recognizing how important this is. That when we talk about inclusion, and we've talked about race and gender and nationalities and sexual presentation, orientation, what we've left out is people with disabilities. And so companies are scrambling to try and catch up. In the meantime, what we have is live human beings to help solve the problem. So like you. Right. Well, yeah, consultants, sure, absolutely. And with closed captioning, you can hire a company, you can pay a company who has a human being who types really fast and is typing along with the closed captioning so that that's accurate. You can have, for example, all of the accessibility webinars that I attend will have somebody doing sign language at ASL for those who sign, which actually is a small percentage of the deaf and hard of hearing community. It's a very small percentage, but it's certainly hugely helpful for those who do, especially for these live events. For example, many deaf people, in fact, a much larger majority of deaf people will read lips, but it's hard to read lips. The good news is on Zoom, it's a little bit easier because our faces are closer, right?
Yeah.
So that
and you can make it bigger.
right. That's helpful. But in person, when we talk about these hybrid models, in person, when you have these large events like like we've all attended that, have thousands of people in them. You can't read lips, even sometimes when you have the big Jumbotron, which usually those events do. It can be hard to read lips because people move around and they're
Right.
on
Well,
stage.
plus those large jumbotrons, they're cutting back and forth to the PowerPoint, to the person, a different angle. They're showing the audience. So, that's not really there for that purpose.
Right. So having a sign interpreter there, and you usually need more than one because it's exhausting to sign all the time. So they have, there are actually rules about how long they can sign. They have to take breaks. But that's an important consideration to have.
Let's talk a little bit about, because in the materials that you sent us, you were talking about creating not just an inclusive event, but an inviting event. How do you do that from the get-go? From the information that comes out marketing the event all the way through the experience? What are your, here's some things you need to think about for our meeting industry people?
Exactly. Great question. I love that. Thanks. So you need to think about representation matters. And this has been discussed a lot within racial communities, the LGBTQ communities. Representation matters. We are now starting to see a few people with disabilities in television programming and that sort of thing on Broadway. It's fantastic. But most events don't have any sort of representation in their marketing material. They'll think about, okay, well, we need to show people of different color and all of this, which is fabulous. What about in a wheelchair? What about somebody who has a cane? Because there's this preconceived notion that's just old people. Only old people use canes, which is not true. I have a collection of fancy canes.
I was just going to say, and you're not old.
Thank you. That's very nice of you. Thank you.
It's also true.
So starting with the visual imagery that you send out, like I was saying, using that modern active symbol, right? Exactly. And also asking how can we provide a comfortable and easily accessible experience for you, as opposed to if you have a need, contact us. See, it's a difference in which way the communication goes. Normally, what happens is if you need something, you have to call us and you have to tell us what you need and you have to specify. And maybe for an extrovert, that's at worst annoying. For an introvert, because people with disabilities are introverts too, that can be just excruciating. That would be enough for them to say, I'm not going to go. I don't want to pick up the phone and talk to somebody about my disabilities, and that's awkward and uncomfortable. So instead, in advance, a meeting planner or a venue, and those are two separate issues going on there, they should be talking to people with different disabilities, talking to somebody who can advise them on what kinds of disabilities to be considering. And then how can they put out information that says, hey, we're going to be labeling all of our food, because we forget to think about food in the disability world. I had a whole conversation with Tracy Stuckrath.
She's going to be a guest in, I think, next week.
Next week, awesome. I think. That's right.
Right. So we talked about this. So communicating how you're going to be labeling foods, communicating about how your seating is going to be done. Social distancing is doing us all a great big favor. And by us, I mean the disability community, with being able to get around because of that back of house seating. Tracy Stuckrath and I met at a conference where there was no room for a person with a wheelchair or a walker, or really even a cane, to navigate to anywhere except for the fringes. And there was one table set at the fringes with no chairs around it. It was a big, like 10-top table with no chairs around it at all. And the handicap symbol in the middle of the table, the little stick figure dude in the middle of the table.
Here's your spot.
Right. So I wheeled up to this table and I'm just sitting there in my wheelchair by myself, talking to nobody. And there are no chairs for a non-disabled person.
So nobody can join you.
Right. Right. It was so weird. And Tracy, because she's a very empathic person
Mm-hmm.
and observant, she pulls up a chair and goes, well, this is weird. You have to sit here by yourself. And that's how we met. And so paying close attention to the seating arrangements and communicating in advance that that's how it's going to be, that you're paying attention, because that communicates that you care and are willing to meet needs. And when you do that, even if you haven't communicated all the needs that somebody has, they're a lot more comfortable to come and say, hey, I really see that you're doing all of this and I so appreciate it. I also need this other thing.
Right.
You know, can you help me with that?
I have, I'm notorious for moving things around in the room setup.
You do.
But one of the things that I do is, if that aisle down the middle is too narrow, speakers don't love the aisle down the middle because it's sort of like speaking into a hole. But if that's the only place for people to access and it's too narrow, people can't, I mean, with everybody sort of congregating, it's hard to get through anyway. But if you are using a wheelchair or a walker or a cane, it's almost impossible to sit anywhere other than way in the back, because it's too much of a struggle to get up to the front.
Right. So I could get into all the details about how many inches wide something needs to be for this and that and the other thing. But the basic thing, if people think, all right, to go anywhere in a straight line, if you are using a wheelchair, you need 4 feet, basically. That's a really comfortable distance. If you're going to have 2 people who are able to pass in a center aisle, you need at least 5 feet, at least. So that's a thing to take into consideration. A lot of times in those, what we call wedding setups.
Yep. Center aisle.
Right. Center aisle, you know, people put these chairs like this, they'll line up all of these chairs and all the chairs can all neatly in a line, right? If you take out the end chair every other row, that creates space so that somebody in a wheelchair can come and they can actually sit in line. Because I have gone to so many conferences where if I wanted to sit anywhere except way in the back, I'm sitting in that wedding aisle. There you are on stage as the speaker, and I'm like, hi.
So that's actually, I've never heard that before. That's actually a great idea for 2 reasons. One, like you said, you can wheel in and not have to be sitting in the aisle, because that must be awkward. But the second thing is, some people like to sit in the front, some people like to be in the back, and some people like to pick a spot in the middle. And typically what we've probably done is left a little area in the back like they do in movie theaters, or in the first row, you know, they haven't set 2 chairs so that somebody could go there. But nobody's ever thought, I've never heard like, let's make it every other row so somebody can choose where to be. That's great.
Right. Well, and people want to sit with their friends. You know, you go to these events and so often people with disabilities, particularly people with mobility disabilities, end up having to separate from their group of friends. You've got an elevator that is way the H away from the stairs. So you're trucking along. I'm in my, you know, pushing my wheels, and I'm with some buddies, and there's the stairs, and they're like, oh, okay, where's the elevator for you? I'm like, I'm going to have to go into the back of the house of the conference center somewhere.
It's in the next county.
Yeah. Right, exactly. Yeah. I'm going to take a detour to Texas. You go on up the stairs, and then I'll be up and around, and I will join the breakout session about a half an hour late, where I have room to only pull into the back of the room.
So, yes.
Yeah. Before we let you go, I'd like to go back to this world of virtual and hybrid events, because we talked about closed captioning, but there has to be more that we're not doing for people at home. So what are some other things we can do in this video world?
Right. Describe visual imagery. Here's the easy thing that you can do, and in the amount of time that we have got, is when we put up PowerPoint slides, for example, are you describing what you're seeing on the screen? Because people who are blind or visually impaired have no idea what's on the screen if you don't describe it to them. So otherwise, if your slides contain a lot of content or they contain visual imagery that's relevant to what you're saying or just relevant to the experience, they're missing out. And they feel like they're missing out. They know they are. So just describe what's visually on the screen.
I'm just
You're
now
both, I can
kind
see
of
you're
like, yeah, like,
I'm trying to put
yeah.
that just even for my next keynote, virtual or live. It's like,
Right.
oh
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
Right. I can see you both like it got real quiet and you went,
Oh, yeah. I don't do that. And I
right.
should, I know better, but I don't do that. There
Try
are
attending.
assumptions.
And I
try
have a
attending.
couple of slides that are sort of, visual, not gag, like laughter, hysterical, but it's like an aha moment to a story I'm telling. I have a
Right.
story I tell about my daughter, and it's a happy ending story, but you don't know that into it. And then a picture of her today comes up, and she's 18 and she's beautiful, and the picture itself makes the audience gasp. But I've never once thought I should tell somebody, I should describe what's just come up on the screen. So you've just made an impact on me.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm really glad to hear that. And along that visual line, people need to put in really good alt text in all of their marketing materials that use digital marketing materials that use images. So all of these pictures that we use, that we post online to promote things, you can go in, and depending on where you're posting, it has different ways of how you edit alt text. But Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn, they will generate automated alt text, but it's usually awful. And
Okay, good to know.
right.
Well,
So
and a little secret for everybody, alt text is actually really good for your SEO if it's on your website. So you probably should be using it anyway.
there you
Right,
go.
but not putting in Liz Green is a fabulous speaker.
No.
Say, it should
Real
say,
descriptions of what
here's
the
a
picture is.
picture of Liz's research on blah, blah, blah. Like it should be about the picture, but it's still
Right.
your
Beautiful woman pointing at slides. See, that's how you describe yourself.
Yeah. Probably wouldn't do that, but but
Right.
so that was so much good information. And I think both Tom and I are like, we have a little work to do.
We all do.
As we're leaving, final words for our meeting industry partners. What do you really want them to keep in mind when they're crafting these events, whether virtual or hybrid or in person?
I want meeting planners to keep in mind that people with disabilities are there. If you don't see them, that means they have invisible disabilities. They're there and they want to be there. So the more you can be considering inclusion, disability inclusion, all it's going to do is make your event better. It's going to increase your revenues, and it's going to increase people's experience. And people with disabilities who have a great experience, they talk about it to everybody because it's so exciting.
So Elisa, this was fantastic. If somebody saw this and maybe they're a meeting planning, maybe they're in another industry and they're like, oh, I need to work on this.
Yes.
I know you can, this is what you do. You consult with organizations on how to do this better. How do people find you?
They can go to my website, elisahays.com, and we can put that in notes so they get the spelling on that right.
And it's right there on your...
There you go. And they could send me an email, elisa@elisahays.com. Be happy to chat.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Well, yet another example of how having a very interesting guest with usable information in a conversation format is a great way to get out some important information.
So
Thank
Eliz,
you so much.
Yeah, Elisa, thank you so much. And Eliz, I have loved doing the webinar talk show with you because I have learned so much in now what has to be I haven't counted them up, but it's got to be like 40 interviews that we've done, 35 interviews that we've done. Something.
I think I don't have the exact count, but we are definitely in the 30s.
Yes. So it's, I mean, I've learned a lot as the host, and I hope the people who are watching on each of these have walked away saying, I got to work on that.
Work on that. Yes. So if you want to find more episodes of the Webinar Talk Show, you can find us at webinartalkshow.com. And please like us on Facebook on the Webinar Talk Show page.
And
Tom,
we go live.
Always a pleasure.
We go live every Monday and Wednesday at 11 Central with interviews like this. So please join in regularly.
We'll see you next week with more great guests